Hi, I'm Dr. Hackie Reitman. Welcome to another episode of Exploring Different Brains. Today we're happy to have as our guest Carol Weinman. Carol is a former prosecutor, and she's been a criminal defense attorney and a family lawyer for over 25 years. She focuses her law practice on special education and specializes in advocating for the interests of those with autism. Ms. Weinman is recognized as an autism expert and legal consultant, author, mediator, trainer, and nationwide speaker on autism. She is passionately committed to educating others worldwide about understanding the autistic brain and behavior and how autism plays a role in the commission of criminal offenses and inappropriate behavior. Carol, welcome to Different Brains.
Good afternoon. Glad to be here.
Thanks for being here. In reading about you, you certainly are a champion of the underdog, and I want to salute you. And I'm so glad that my friend, Philadelphia attorney Don Yablon, went to one of your instructional courses and said, Hackie, you got to talk to her. She's terrific. Let's start off by introducing yourself to our audience and telling them in your words exactly what you do.
Well, as you said, I've been a criminal attorney for over 25 years, and 22 years ago, I gave birth to a son, one of twins, who ended up having autism spectrum disorder. And that's what led me into this journey that I began then in the world of autism. And what happened was that the combination of my criminal law background and autism intersected because, unfortunately, a lot of individuals on the autism spectrum are finding themselves with encounters with the criminal justice system. So while I also advocate for those with special needs in the special education realm, what has become my specialty niche, and I believe I'm the only one in the country that has the dual expertise in the autism and the criminal law. So I've become an expert, an autism expert and autism legal consultant in the realm of criminal law, educating those, the prosecutors, defense attorneys, judges, police officers. I do trainings, I do international speaking on that topic and other topics related to autism. And I serve as an expert witness in the courtroom to assist a person, a criminal attorney without the expertise in autism who may be representing an individual on the autism spectrum.
Well, it's very interesting. We interviewed William Packard, who wrote the book on neurodiversity within the prison and justice system. And this is now coming into the fore more and more, as you know. It amazes me that there's not more knowledge on the part of doctors, on the part of lawyers, policemen, and society in general, that all of our brains are different. When I was out in San Francisco with the Ascend people out there, Michael Bernick and his crew, and I met with the San Francisco police who had combined with the Ascend Autism organization to combine together to make a video, which was great. And here you had an autistic individual looking into the camera and saying, look, I'm not trying to be rude, but I just can't look into your eyes, and I'm not trying to be a wise guy. Give us some of the examples you run into of, for lack of a better term, I'll call it wrongful assumptions on the part of the police officers, not because they're bad people, because they haven't had the training, they don't know. Give us some of that.
Well, I'm really glad you asked that, Hackie, because that's a lot of what I speak about. I often speak to the issue that the demystifying the behavior and the behaviors that call attention to these individuals by the police officers. So oftentimes, because their brains work differently, they often will do things inadvertently and unknowingly that call attention to them and call attention to them from a police officer. So some examples may be of cases that I've represented a lot of individuals on these cases as well as the attorney. And a lot of the things I've come across are, for example, you may have an individual walking down the street, and then he or she, and the bulk of them are males at this point, but he or she may have an odd gait, be walking funny, and something about the way they walk or the way they're acting calls attention to a police officer who happens to see this, and he's looking from their perspective rather suspicious. They think there's something going on here. That might be one example. Another example is that many of them, they're very, very curious. And their curiosity will often lead them into places that they shouldn't be. For example, they may be peeking into a window that they shouldn't be looking into, and a police officer thinks they're, sort of like what we used to refer to as a peeping Tom. They may be staring at someone oddly to a point that the person feels uncomfortable. They tend to find themselves in situations where they are accused of alleged harassment, stalking, which I've actually written on, because it looks like they're stalking an individual because they may be following them. They may be sitting and staring at them for a long time, and it makes people very uncomfortable. But in terms of them actually calling attention to the police firsthand, it would be those kinds of behaviors. Stimming. There was a big case in the news where there was an individual with what we call stimming, which means repetitive behavior that's not within their control. And he was holding something and he kept twirling it. And the officer became very suspicious and approached him and thought he was doing something with drugs or illegal. He didn't know what he was doing. These are some of the examples of how they are targeted unknowingly by police officers for things that they are not even aware that they are doing. The other area that unfortunately we find ourselves in with this population are a lot of sex offenses, child pornography, sexual assault, and that's a whole nother area to speak on because it has to do with the whole issue of theory of mind, which is that they cannot empathize nor step into someone else's shoes. So in the issues of sexual assault, there's this whole issue of consent, around consent, and the fact that if they think they want to do it, they assume the other person's thinking the same thing. So it goes out into a lot of different areas and can get rather complicated. What I have found my greatest challenge has been to be able to illuminate people and educate anybody out there, whether it be parents, whether it be psychologists, whether it be doctors, whether it be people in the law profession, of how their brains are so different. And primarily, Hackie, what I come up against a lot is to get them to understand that this is not a mental illness. You see, there's provisions in the law for mental illness, but there aren't provisions yet. We haven't caught up with autism. It's a developmental neurological disorder, and that's very different than a mental illness, especially at the way that the law looks at it.
So let's say I'm a parent and I have a child who gets arrested, and based on my limited knowledge, there are not Carol Weinmans on every corner. How many people are there that do what you do?
I have to humbly tell you, Hackie, I'm it.
Okay, so you're it. So
there is nobody else at this time that has the expertise and knowledge and does what I do.
For our viewers here at Different Brains who might have one of their family who is on the spectrum, who's being arrested or going through the system, what is your best advice to them? Is your best advice to say, have your attorney contact Carol or someone like her who knows the ins and outs of this, because otherwise you're going to have to reinvent the wheel?
Yeah, my best advice is that as soon as your child is arrested, or at the very beginning of the process, you get a criminal attorney of your choice where you live, and you then consider bringing me on board as the autism legal consultant to handle the issue of autism. And what is so important to understand about that, Hackie, is that the entire case is about the autism. You see, when a criminal attorney approaches a case, they look at the person from the standpoint of a criminal defendant. That's one perspective. But when you get someone with autism that is arrested as a criminal defendant, in my opinion, the entire case rests on the autism. So that's why you have to bring someone like me on board. Now, I am doing, I'm getting more and more involved in training the trainer, trying to get so that I can get other people out there possibly to understand. But unfortunately, it has taken me literally about 20 years to gain this knowledge and expertise from raising a child and from reading endlessly. It's very difficult to just have somebody else gain that level of expertise in a training session or whatever. It's a very complicated disorder, and it has a lot of subtleties there are a lot of subtleties to autism. So it is very difficult, and I find it actually a little dangerous when someone has a little knowledge and tries to go out there and advocate for someone with autism, because they don't know what they don't know, and there are subtleties that come up. So my best advice would be to call or contact me. If I can't do it, maybe I can, suggest something. But I'm heartbroken when I get a lot of people that call me at the end of the case, after the verdict is, and they get a really bad verdict. It's too hard to undo it. It's got to be done from the beginning. And it has been heartbreaking to me, because if you get a criminal attorney that represents someone with autism, they will often be the first one to tell you that they are out of their comfort zone. They have no idea what they're dealing with. And that case is just going to go in one direction. They're going to represent it like they represent a defendant. Quite honestly, it's getting to a point where I even believe that that's not effective counsel. I think you've got to have somebody that understands autism when you get a client.
One of the shows we have on differentbrains.org is Spectrumly Speaking with Becca Laurie and Dr. Kate Cody. And Becca Laurie is an adult female autistic individual, is very successful, and she's on our board also. And it seems that women get the short end of the stick, so to speak, when it comes to diagnosis. Many of them are not diagnosed till into their 30s and so forth. And I'm imagining that in the criminal justice system, the preponderance are male. But tell us about a female going through the criminal justice system.
Well, I have had contact with, you're right, it's much fewer. It's primarily male, almost all of my clients. I will tell you about a female I got that was really tragic. She ended up, the best way to explain it, she ended up shooting somebody to protect a child in her mind. In terms of your question of what it's like for them to go through the system, maybe the best way for me to answer that is that autism spectrum disorder looks very different in females. And we're still, I think, not totally in our infancy, but very much in the inception period of understanding how it manifests in females and how many females are out there on the autism spectrum, because they have gotten missed even more than males because of how it manifests itself. It's much more, males tend, just by the fact that they're men, to be more physical. So it will come up in physical, offenses of striking out at someone physically. That's not what we see in females. And in females, it's much more subtle. So it's often gotten missed because they might just seem odd, but nothing is really putting them on the radar. So we aren't seeing as many females, Hackie. That's one of the few that I have actually come into contact with so far. What I am seeing are a lot more females that are realizing that they have the disorder as an adult. But in terms of coming into contact with the criminal justice system, I'm not seeing a lot of that yet. Look, fortunately, that can change.
If I'm a Different Brains viewer here and I see you, or I listen to you on the podcast version of this, or I read the transcript version of this, how do I get a hold of you?
The best way to get me right now would be through my website, an email. My website is WeinmanLawOffice.com. That's my last name, lawoffice.com. And you can reach me at C.A.S. as in Sam, which is my middle initial, Weinman, at weinmanlawoffice.com. You can either reach me via email, or there's also a contact form on my website.
Well, Carol, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here at Exploring Different Brains. I hope we can see you again in the future as well.
Thank you. I would love that. And I am very inspired by the work that you're doing. And I feel very honored to be part of your programming.
Exploring Different Brains is a production of Different Brains, Inc. For more information, visit us at differentbrains.org.